The senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Point of personal interest.
You're recognized on point of personal interest. Senator from Beaufort, up to 5 minutes.
Mr. President, have some water, please. Yes.
Senator from Beaufort.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. I think it's the first time this session I've risen on a point of personal interest. And this is going to be the first time this session that you've heard me talk about the Compassionate Care Act, the empowerment of doctors under very limited circumstances to authorize patient use of cannabis, subject to continual physician oversight, subject to being dispensed by pharmacists, limited to conditions for only which there's empirical evidence that there's a medicinal benefit that cannabis can provide to a patient who's suffering. But I'm going to speak about it today because we're approaching crossover deadline. And I had honestly thought, based on my discussions with my colleagues in the Senate, that we were going to get this bill over to the House this year, where it was last year, after passing 28-16, and then being ruled on the last day or last week of session as being out of order because it had a revenue-raising component to it, because it had a sales tax imposed to help cover the cost of the program. First time ever they've ever done that. After the clerk, Ken Moffitt, Sarah Parrish, everybody reviewed with me and said, this is not a revenue-raising bill. This raises revenue ancillary to a primary purpose of the bill that's other than revenue-raising. Don't worry about it. But it got ruled out of order. We got punked by the House over there and got our wings clipped. Back then, everybody was so angry that we were going to try to take it up and put it on another bill, but it got ruled out of order as not being germane, so that couldn't happen. But that's okay. We were going to have it this year. I'm going to give you a state of where we are right now with this bill. The federal government, if it's possible, has given even more green lights in regard to letting states do this. The IRS has issued regs. Congress every year puts in the budget saying medical marijuana states are not to be challenged. The Treasury Department has issued regs to banks, allowing them to take proceeds from medical cannabis sales. The Attorney General has told the U.S. attorneys to stand down and not enforce federal law against any state that has authorized medical use of cannabis. The federal courts consistently, time and time again, have said this is an appropriate space for states to act. And yet we still have those that say the Supremacy Clause and the oath that they take to the U.S. Constitution prevents them from voting for this bill. That is ridiculous and wrong and false. The second thing I'll say is this. In addition to all those green lights that the federal government is now giving us, other states are now adopting this. North Carolina is about to become the 39th state. Their Senate passed it. Our bill, this bill we debated for 3 weeks last year, after 8 years worth of subcommittee testimony, is more restrictive. Now, what do I mean by more restrictive? It's restrictive, Senator from Orangeburg, in regard to the conditions that can be treated by it. It's not wide open. It's very narrowly circumscribed to where there's empirical data saying there's a medical relationship between taking it and a benefit. It's not anecdotal. It doesn't allow smoking. It requires a doctor on the front end to have an incredible amount of due diligence to say they've explored every other alternative before they then authorize cannabis for one of these limited purposes. We worked on the floor to have pharmacists involved in the process. We're one of the few states that have pharmacists involved. So we got medical professionals at the front end and the back end. This is the most conservative bill, and yet we can't take it up for debate. And some of the reasons that I've heard recently as to why we can't take it up for debate is that this work product, Senator from Lawrence, is not worthy of this Senate because it hasn't been vetted. 8 years worth of hearings, over a dozen subcommittee hearings of testimony, 3 weeks of Senate debate with amendments adopted, and this bill isn't ready for this Senate to debate because it hasn't been vetted. That was embarrassing. I'm sorry I didn't stand there for you, Chairman of Medical Affairs, when you were criticized for pulling it out of committee, a bill that we've already approved out of committee, and subjected you to the criticism from some of our colleagues that you did this Senate a disservice by sending up work product that wasn't worthy of the Senate. Okay? There are people who are suffering. And I sent to you, a lot of you, a text from someone you all know and love about what she's going through right now with her mother, who is dying of pancreatic cancer, who is in so much pain from chemotherapy. She had to be taken to the emergency room last night and put on opioids, which knocked her out completely. When we know that cannabis can be a therapeutic substitute for that increases quality of life. This is embarrassing that we can't do this. It's embarrassing to me. It really is. Now, I can go through all the aspects of this bill that makes it conservative, but I think after 3 weeks worth of debate, robust debate in which I took up every reasonable amendment that was offered and incorporated, I don't need to repeat that to y'all. You know throughout this process, there's physicians on the front end, there's pharmacists on the back end, there's regulation all throughout. You can't smoke it, you can't have it in certain forms, you can't appeal to children, you have to have independent labs. Every single state law that has passed this, I have borrowed from the best provisions to make this a bill we can be proud of, a bill that I would say is beyond precedent for having been vetted, and yet we have people in this chamber that say it hasn't been vetted. That's a lie. It's a lie, and it's not compassionate, and it's wrong. I've got to listen to the phone calls from people asking me what the hell has happened. I waited my turn. I hadn't talked about this. We took up CON repeal. We took up school choice. We take up China now. We're going to take up preemption. We're going to take up other things. I waited my turn because it was understood we were going to take this up because it passed 28-16 last year. A majority of the Republican caucus passed it last year. And the House clipped our wings on it and embarrassed our staff.
Senator from Dartmouth, what purpose you rise?
Unanimous consent request.
State your request.
Unanimous consent to give the senator from Beaufort 5 more minutes.
Is there objection?
His
5 more
expiration of
minutes. His time was expiring. 5 minutes. No objection to the additional 5 minutes. Senator from Beaufort.
I had to come back
minutes.
here, Senator from Orangeburg, and explain to Sarah Parrish and Ken Moffitt about how the advice that they gave this chamber had been overruled by Tommy Pope, who was presiding over in the House. Okay? They were embarrassed. They gave good advice. And this Senate, if you'll recall, this Senate was ready to take action and try to put it onto another bill, and we were going to go do it until somebody objected to it as not being germane, which the president gave the right ruling. No complaint about that. So I apologize to the chairman of Medical Affairs for the criticism that you got on this. I really am. I should have stood up for you. I should have stood up for you. The reason it didn't get taken up in material part is because misrepresentations were being made to members in regard to what the House would do with this bill if it got sent over there. Information was relayed to members in the Senate that it doesn't matter if we take it up this year, the House isn't going to take it up. So why do the heavy lifting? The House is going to take it up. I've been working with Speaker Smith for the last year on getting this taken up. And if any of those senators that wanted to use that as a reason not to set this in special order, they could have come to me, looked me in the face, and said, this is what we're hearing, and I would have set them straight. But Senator Orangeburg, they didn't bother to do that. They embarrassed me on the floor of this Senate when the majority leader stood up during the motion period and made a motion for special order. The opponents of this bill screamed no, so it got to a roll call. And then when it went to a roll call, 7 or 8 individuals who I worked with last year adopted their amendments last year, answered their questions last year, and they voted for this bill last year. They went ahead and flipped and voted it down. In the 15 years I've been in the Senate, I have never experienced that. Never. Never have. And it is not something that I'll ever do to another member. I would never do that. In fact, what I do is on subcommittees that I chair, and I'm the floor leader, even if I don't like that bill, I take it on as something I'm going to get passed. I'm going to get it passed, even if I have reservations. Genetic counseling. I've got reservations in regard to whether it needs to be licensed, but I respect the will of my colleagues. It's in my subcommittee, and I'm going to come to this well, and I'm going to get the thing passed, because that is what an honorable member does. I have not been treated honorably. The people of South Carolina have not been treated honorably. We are behaving in a way that's driven by fear and misimpressions and misinformation. We're going to be the 50th state to authorize this. And in the meantime, we have people who are taking opioids for things that they could have released from medical cannabis. We have individuals with neurological disorders. We have people that have Crohn's disease, people who have real maladies for which there is empirical, peer-reviewed science saying this can help, and we're telling doctors no. And I don't have an answer for all the people that are calling me saying, why couldn't you get this done? And I failed. You know what? I'm tempted to just go ahead and take my name off the bill, let somebody else be the primary sponsor of that, because maybe they can get it done where I can't. Because obviously after 9 years, you know what? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again with a different result. Maybe I'm not the person to lead this thing. Maybe somebody else should lead this thing. And I'm happy to yield to it because it's far more important that this get done and that doctors be allowed to do what doctors think is in a patient's best interest than me getting any credit for it. We had this debate in regard to COVID and in regard to ivermectin and the things that doctors felt were in patients' best interest. And a lot of people rose up and said, who are we to second guess these doctors? If these doctors think this is in the patient's best interest, politicians don't belong there. When it served their political interest to say that they did, but when it's in something like this, they don't. That's just wrong. Now, I realize that this bill is probably dead for another year. Thank y'all. Probably dead for another year. And I weighed whether or not to say anything about it. Just play an inside game, build up capital, help people with their bills, be a good faith broker on subcommittee chairmanship, do the job. That ain't working for me anymore. So I'm going to try a different approach.
Senator from Orangeburg. Senator Hutter, what purpose do you ask, sir?
To ask a question, please.
Senator yield for questions.
Senator, do you know how many members of this body are thinking about running for the House? None. Do you know how many people over in the House are thinking about running for the Senate? Probably all of them if you asked them. Why would we not stand up for our own body's work? Why would we yield to rumors of what the House might do? Isn't it incumbent on us to do what we think is right and the best policy and let the House then act? They rolled us last year. This bill needs to go back to the House.
And the bill would pass the House, okay? The bill had the votes to pass the House. This is what they had to do in order to stop it, okay?
Senator from Charleston, Senator Sin, what purpose do you ask?
To see if he'll briefly yield.
Senator yield for a question. Senator yields for a question.
Senator, you know the ins and outs of this bill better than anybody. Have any of the definitions from the bill we passed before changed, or were there any substantive changes in your bill?
There are. The substantive change is we've taken out any revenue-raising component to it, although I don't think that's required. I don't think that's what the state Supreme Court decision says when it defines a revenue-raising bill. But you know what? As Senator McConnell used to say, there's no education in the second kick of the mule. That's been stripped out.
Okay.
A lot of the amendments that were adopted on the floor last year, if you recall, Senator from Charleston, were adopted on the fly and quickly. Okay? I have attempted to make those, integrate them into the bill better, use better language, and I would represent to this body that the substance of the amendments are the same, but I tried to make it so that it was a clean work product we could be proud of. And the amendments we adopted during that 3-week period just weren't as polished as I thought they should be. So there are some changes in that regard.
Okay.
But in regard to the overall thrust of it, in regard to the qualifying conditions, in regard to the authorization you need from a physician, in regard to pharmacists having to dispense it, in regard to it not appealing to children, in regard to the inspections that have to take place, in regard to all of those things that I deem to be material aspects of this bill, they're the same.
So,
which is why it was pulled out of committee.
So, right, and so that's my question. If you're taking the position, you're telling this entire body, and we have no reason to doubt you as you're an honorable senator. If there have not been any changes that we can't look at the bill and understand, in other words, we have not materially changed definitions or anything that we didn't all debate and it went through with amendments other than the fact that it's not a revenue raiser anymore. Is that what you're saying?
There are, and in regard to the changes that were made, I would represent to this body that they aren't material in terms of what the intent was. Now some language has been changed because I felt like it needed to be more precise, because amendments were being drafted on the fly.
Yes.
So I don't want to misrepresent to the body that the amendments verbatim as adopted are the same as what's in this work product. But I will say to you, they accomplish the same objectives and in a way that I think has better language and is clear.
Point being,
Senator, the additional time has expired.
Mr. President,
Senator from Charleston, Senator Sent.
unanimous consent to give the senator another 5 minutes.
Is objection, additional 5 minutes. Hearing none, so ordered. Senator from Charleston, continue your question.
So, Senator, the point being, I understand you polished up the language, but any of us who went through the debate last year, which is all of us, we could go back and read it and understand that the intent of what you put forth was the same. We would not have to go outside and do our own research. We would not have to find out definitions or seek expert opinions or anything like that. We would be able to understand it from the 8 years of testimony and from what we all debated last year. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but yet you said that, and I didn't know this, you indicated that the chair of medical affairs was criticized for polling this thing out. But didn't we do just that with abortion that contained a lot of new medical definitions and had no medical testimony?
I think that is in fact the case, and you made that point. My point was a larger one, and I failed when the criticism came to my chairman on this about how it had been pulled out and not vetted. And I think the exact quote was, and I'm not going to betray confidence on the floor of the Senate and embarrass somebody by naming them, but to say that this bill is not worthy for debate by the Senate because it hasn't been vetted, when we've had it for 9 years now, when we've had over a dozen subcommittee hearings with testimony, when we had 3 weeks worth of robust debate on this bill, to say that this bill is an unworthy work product, I take offense to. I take offense to, and I take offense on behalf of my chairman.
And if you don't mind, I don't know who it is, and I know you say you don't want to disclose who said it wasn't worthy, but I was sitting here and I was quite shocked and amazed that all of a sudden you weren't getting the votes you needed for special order. What
happened? In the 15 years that I've been here, when the majority leader stands up and makes a motion, I can't remember a time when what happened on that bill, okay, and what happened to me as I twisted here on the floor, I can't remember that happening. Even the senator in this chamber who I disagree with most ideologically, maybe somebody I really don't like personally, I would never treat a senator like that, especially when they don't come up to me, sit me down, look me in the eye, and tell me what they're going to do. I would never do that.
Thank you.
Senator from Georgetown, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Senator, yield for a question.
Senator yields for question.
Senator, I only have one question for you, and I think it gets to the heart of what convinced me. Senator, is it this state's policy to keep weed out of the hands of the pothead at the expense of the little girl that has cerebral palsy?
Absolutely.
The cancer patient, the ALS patient, the MS patient. Is that the policy of this state?
That's the policy right now, but let me tell you what's happening, Senator from Georgetown. They're going out and buying it anyway because they desperately need it. Margaret Richardson, who was on that screen, remember her talking about? She goes out and has to buy it illegally. God knows if it has fentanyl in it. God help us if somebody going out there trying to get the benefits that are well documented in peer-reviewed studies to benefit from a medical condition, and they die because we would not allow it to be purchased safely, labeled, inspected, controlled in a way that's responsible. Like 38 states have done, North Carolina's about to do it. God help us, because it's going to happen. They're going to die. They're going to go out there and purchase it because they're so desperate and they need it. They have to have it, and they're going to die. Because it's going to be laced with fentanyl, and it ain't going to be controlled the way it should be controlled, and that's going to be on our hands. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm done.
He refuses to respond to additional questions. Senator from Lawrence, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I'd like to be recognized on a point of personal interest.
Recognized on a point of personal interest. As he comes to the podium, the Senator from McCormick, what purpose do you rise?
Davis be placed in our record.
Without objection, unanimous consent that the words from Senator from Buford be placed in the record without objection. Senator from Lawrence is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, our appreciation for each other as we interact, as we stare into each other's countenances, we're actually looking through each other, representing 5+ million, 115 or 17,000 individually that we represent. My appreciation continues to grow. I'm thankful for that because there's nothing that would be counter to our spirits than to think it had all been done. Our growing here, our representation of the people, it's downhill from here. Senator from Beaufort, I really shudder. I know that we're all irreplaceable, but sir, Senator from Beaufort, as I spend my time here, you're not replaceable. The service that you bring to us in our little point in time is immeasurable. As it relates to the Medical Affairs Committee, it's incalculable because, Senator, I'll just tell you, we all come here with certain abilities and certain skill sets, and yours are I can't think of superlatives to describe your service to us, your service to South Carolina. And as it relates to all these hard issues that we're dealing with in medical affairs, the reason I come to you so much is because I don't have others in the committee coming and begging for this work. And I'm sure there's other committees that have the same regard for your work product. I do want to just acknowledge the fact that we have polled bills. We've polled a lot of hard bills. We've polled a lot of 9-8 votes out of this committee. And as it's been represented to the members of the committee on the poll, no substantive changes. A lot of language changes, but I'm going to confess there were only 2 members of the committee that actually saw the work and analysis of staff. Others that may have looked at it very briefly there on the floor as the poll sheet was going around, but for the work of the drafting and then the work of coming to the conclusion that we needed to poll, it was just you and the senator from Anderson. And certainly not, and there may have been a member or 2 not on the committee that asked for material relating to the bill, and it was on a side-by-side basis. That document is available to anyone now. We're all sensitive about what we put out here because our time is valuable, but it was that valuable time in trying to cooperate with the consensus on both sides of this aisle to try to put some work product together for the consideration of this Senate, knowing there was much more hard work coming down the pike. And there still is. Probably all aware that 105 was occupied by a incredibly painful debate this morning for a couple hours. Painful regardless of your perspective, pro or con of the bill. For those of y'all that are working on that, thank you. I appreciate you. But Senator, whether it is further committee work on that subject or it remains here, whatever the will of this body is, I'm committed to you. I've done a lot of things differently here in the last year that I hope will be of service to you. As you well know, I'm like the senator from Edgefield, the senator from Easley, the senator from McCormick. I like to sleep in my own bed at night, but I've only slept in my own bed twice this year in session days because I'm trying to be of better service to you. So whatever needs to be done in regard to the Senate's obligations, I'm committed to it. I just want to say, I hope I'm not running out of time, but I do want to take a minute or two to discuss this very subject of compassionate care. I don't think there's any of us, and there's different membership now, I don't think there's anyone here when this subject was first introduced to us who was more diametrically opposed to the concept than I. Maybe some equally, and some that are still. Now, my perspective might not have been driven by the same interest groups or stakeholders. I'll say my ear was not as attuned to law enforcement as some others, but I certainly wasn't neglectful of it. My ear was attuned primarily to medicine, and I'm conservative by nature, and I'm not wanting to get ahead of medical science and research. But the overarching issue of compassion as related to the inculcation of our faith started me down the path of reconsidering my position and then giving heed and attention and to discern as best I can the medical science. And that's how I've come to the position of following your leadership and trying to be of an assist.
Senator from Darling, what purpose do you rise?
Unanimous consent request.
State your request.
Unanimous consent to give the senator from Lawrence 5 more minutes.
Is there objection for additional 5 minutes from the Senator from Lawrence? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Senator from Lawrence.
Thank you, Senators. And I don't like to even contemplate the crass political environment, who's interested in what seats. I love serving here. I'm more hopeful of my service here than I've been in a while. So for me, on a subject like this, based on the votes we've taken, in God's providence, it may just be that I have more opportunities to demonstrate for my constituents, who a lot are still coming, to my understanding. But that process is taking place with our electorate, just as it has for many of us in here. So, as I've hit a stage in life with children, grandchildren, business, it's more and more borne upon me that we're not weather vanes. The day and age we're living in, if I can be proud of anything, and I hate to even use the word pride, but I tell you, I'm not on the phone calling a political consultant every time a hard vote comes down through here. I've never done it. And I would encourage all of us to do it less.
Senator Orangeburg.
I'm concluding my remarks. Thank you for the opportunity to come behind my colleague and hopefully bring some clarification and the opportunity to lay out before you my commitment to build consensus and build better quality of life for all of the people we represent, our family, our friends, our neighbors.
Senator from Lexington. Senator
Unanimous
Sedgwick.
consent request.
State your request.
Words of the Senator from Lawrence be placed in the journal.
Is there objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Senator from Orangeburg, Senator Hutto, what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal expression.
And then I'll come to the Senator from Clarendon.
Members, I want to make 3 quick points. One, to the Senator from Beaufort, there is no better leader on this issue than you, and I think you've proven that this morning. You've proven it over and over again, And while frustrations may abound, those of us who know the time you've put in on this issue, the depth of knowledge that you have, the research you've undertaken, the experts, the citizens in pain that you've talked to, we recognize that, and you need to be still at the forefront of this. And I know you may be frustrated, but do not go away. We need you. To the chairman of the committee, you have established time and time again fairness in the way you approach issues. You have given both sides on many, many difficult issues equal time. You've allowed for robust debate. And so for anybody to suggest that this bill wasn't ready for a vote is absolutely ridiculous. The other 2 points I want to make are this. We came in here this year with almost everybody acknowledging that we've got a real problem in South Carolina with fentanyl. And the reason we have a problem with fentanyl is multifaceted, but part of it is there are people suffering out there who are looking to self-medicate when, if they had medical marijuana available to them, prescribed by a doctor, filled by a pharmacist, knowing that it's not laced with fentanyl, they wouldn't be on fentanyl. They would be under the care of a doctor, and they would be receiving the treatment that they need for the conditions that they suffer from. We put the idea that fentanyl deaths are a plague in our community at the forefront of what we were going to talk about this year, and part of the solution to getting people not dying from fentanyl is to be able to have them be able to treat their conditions for pain under the care of a doctor in a reasonable way. And part of that is medical marijuana. And the final point I want to make is this. It's time for this Senate to stand up to the House in a circumstance like this. Our rules hamstrung us, whatever the word is, our rules thwarted us last year from responding when they ruled this out of order. We didn't have a vehicle to amend with something else, and our rules just would not permit it. I spoke to y'all about this last year, that I thought we needed to consider that when we next consider rules changes, that our germaneness issue in some of these instances, particularly in the last days of the session, just leave us at the mercy of the House. So the House won that on a technicality last year. So the senator from Beaufort started the process over, learned from what they did, refined his bill, put the bill in. It is time for this Senate to debate this bill. Whether we go back to the motion period, whether it's by unanimous consent, whether it's by the Rules Committee slot, a bill of this magnitude that has been waiting on our calendar for 9 years deserves debate. I'm not asking anybody in this chamber to change their vote on how you feel about this bill, but I am asking this Senate to take this bill up.
Senator from Clarendon.
Thank you, Mr.
Very
President.
kind.
Thank you. I actually wanted to rise for a moment of personal interest, but
You're recognized.
my interest is not directly related to medical marijuana, and I know that the senator from Darling and others may want to talk about that bill, so I will yield to them. And
You're very kind. Thank you. And now I'll come back to you. Senator from Darling.
Point of
Purpose
personal
do you
interest.
rise?
Point of personal interest.
You're recognized. Senator from Darling.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I rise first to acknowledge one of our senators who has exhibited great statesmanship in his careful selection of his words from this podium, his passion for the issue that he has worked on, and the perseverance that he has for something that he truly believes in. Senator from Beaufort. And whether or not you agree or disagree with him on the issue, you have to admire how his passion has led him to work for the citizens of South Carolina and the constituents that he is trying to serve. I remember not too long ago, the senator from Georgetown, Senator Goldfinch, stood on this Senate floor and talked about an issue of economic development down in his area and was applauded for his passion. And I realize is that a lot of times that we have differences in this body, and we should have differences. And that's what medical marijuana is. We have differences of opinions as to how it worked. But I joined with them in last year, and I go back for those that remember when we were having discussions on the Johnson Act many years ago. We started talking about a revenue raiser and how it had to start in the House of Representatives, and all of a sudden we got a ruling and we said it did not, we fixed it. And that was the time we were working on having boats that sailed to nowhere, if you recall. And then I'm reminded as to what happened not too long ago, where we were all different in this body and had worked on it for years and years and years and years. And then out of the darkness of night came one of the most gross murders in this century. And our beloved brother fell from life. We raised him back up on the walls of this Senate. He's going on now, but he still remains an angel on our shoulder that whispers to our ear and says, "What are y'all doing in the Senate?" What he exhibited is that the best of us. And we all said that. But when we came back together, there were those of us that reasonably disagreed. And the Confederate flag came down. And we had about 3 of our brothers in the Senate that said no. I wanted to stay up. Not calling the names. We talked. Said, this is just where I am. And I understand it. But there was some, and I wish at some point in time that the world could see my text messages and the messages that came from our brothers here in the Senate. It said, this has to lead to reconciliation. Some of the things I don't agree with, I have to end up going because I can't stand to see our citizens hurt. And as you know, we had citizens that were hurt. When I became an advocate for medical marijuana, I knew that citizens were being hurt. Do I agree with everything in it? Probably not. But I do know that if we were to have this matter that put before the public, which I plan on trying to do at some point, I know it's non-binding. I know what the Attorney General opinion is going to say. It's non-binding. The public needs to know. But back on the story of the Confederate flag, I can never thank you enough because I know sometimes it went against some of the folks' very core. But we got it done. And my last story I'll tell you is one of my people that I read his works, and that is Nelson Mandela. And in Nelson Mandela's trial, he was his own lawyer. And what he said reminded me of the passion of the senator from Beaufort. He says, I am prepared to die. And he served for 27 years in that jail. People came after him. And ultimately, when he came to the pinnacle of his political career, became the president in South Africa, he invited those prison guards to his investiture. And they asked him, says, why would you invite someone that has been at one time picked upon you and you had no reason to invite, and they were problematic for you. And the response was just simply this. He goes, there comes a time in your life when you have to let it go. And so the message is you got to let it go. Because it happens to you, what happens to the people in South Carolina? If it causes pain for someone in South Carolina, your heartfelt convictions as to what you think, you got to at least pause and say, what is important? Relieving them of their pain or standing on what I just believe in? Mandela said, I am relieving them of their pain by inviting them. I'm letting it go. I don't want them to have to live with the hardships that they put upon me.
Senator, your 5 minutes.
Folks, what happens now that we've had North Carolina to get into it almost 39 years?
Senator from Orangeburg, Senator Stevens, state your unanimous consent.
Give the senator from Darlington 5 additional minutes.
I won't need that much. Thank you.
Is there objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered.
We have 39 states now that would have passed medical marijuana. How many thousands of people that can get relief? And I know the arguments. I think this is going to land to something else. You're not the scientists. We're the senators. My extra point is on my brothers and sisters in the House of Representatives. I watched that unfold last session. It was painful. And I do believe the Senate has to act. And I do believe that there are times the Senate has to act like the Senate. And I do believe that there are times when we have to corral around, I'm not going to speak to the substance of this, we have to corral around one of our members that has worked on this issue when we have actually, same body, same crew, same team from last year that sent it over there. She sent it over again. The emphasis behind it is this is the Senate. And if we have something that is just personal, then I'm reminded you back to my brethren that were standing fast on a Confederate flag and came to a point in time when they said, we got to let it go. And to emulate Nelson Mandela, after 27 years of imprisonment, to have his come to Jesus moment, Senator from Richland, and says, I'm going to let it go and invite his captives to his investitures after all of the pain and harm that they had placed upon him. And at some point in time, folks, we got to, in the immediate short future, we need to let it go too. We need to get a chance to end up having that bill put before the Senate in South Carolina. Not for us, for those people that are victims out there that are in pain now, that are having to yield to oxycodone and other issues to relieve their pain, which we are trying to end up getting rid of the epidemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Darlington. Are there any petitions, Senator from Collinton? What purpose do you ask?
For two purposes.
State your.
To ask that the words of the senator from Darlington be placed in the journal.
Without objection, so ordered.
And unanimous consent to come forward for a point of personal expression.
Personal interest?
Interest, yes.
Thank you. You're recognized for up to 5 minutes. Point of personal interest.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't expect that I would come up on this issue, and I'm going to try to keep this as quick as possible. I was surprised the other day when this Senate took up the issue of whether or not we would place Compassionate Care Act in its appropriate spot so that we could deliberate on it and consider it. And it seemed, and Senator Davis is exactly correct, every other special order or rules position vote has gone along the lines of placing what the majority has requested in that spot. So I was surprised that a number of even my own colleagues, they mistook that vote not for it being placed in its proper place, the question wasn't, do you agree with the bill? Because no one had looked at the bill. The question was whether or not this Senate should have given it its proper place. The question isn't whether or not you agree with the Compassionate Care Act. The question was whether or not this senator, who had worked 9 hard years on this issue, deserved to have it brought before the board. Should it have should he have been given his opportunity as you would have wanted if this was your issue? I don't understand how a lot of us didn't understand. The question isn't, do you agree with him? The question is, do we owe, in this body, to our comrades the right to deliberate on their bill? I was surprised that a lot of and one of the senators said something about meritocracy. I looked it up. It's a government governed by the merits of what your particular skills are. Now, it's been said, and I'm not going to swab or rub on Senator Davis anymore, there is nobody more meritorious to argue this issue because of all the work that he has done on this Compassionate Care Act. When I got here in 2015, it was him here with the pictures. It was him here with the families. We were allowed to talk to people to find out what was doing. And he was doing this outside of committees. And what was one of the first committees I was assigned to? I was assigned to be on the subcommittee for the Compassionate Care Act. And I'm going to tell you something. I've been on a lot of subcommittees. This subcommittee was not a substance. It was not a subcommittee where you sit there and listen, and then you go on about your business. Senator Davis had a subcommittee where he gave us assignments. I have never been on a subcommittee that required so much work. He gave us an assignment and respected us enough to carry it out, and he expected at the next committee meeting that we would have a response. Lo and behold, he knew that and this is where we get to the meritocracy issue, he knew that I did a lot of criminal defense and civil defense. So what did he do? He placed me in charge on the subcommittee with dealing with SLED. Now, I have a lot of experience and respect for SLED as well as my police departments and sheriff's department. I got with the Sheriff's Association, I got with the city police officers, and during the summer, when everybody else was going about their business, I had not 1, not 2, but 3 meetings in my conference room alone with the stakeholders. And what did I hear? I heard we went through all of the elements, we went through all of the different chapters of this bill, and I asked them, how can we make this better for you? How can we make this better so that we do not We did not take into consideration your concern. Number one concern that I always heard was this is a gateway drug. Well, it doesn't say it in here. How do we fix that? And when Senator Kempson was dealing with doctors and medical staff, that was his assignment. They took care of the gateway drug issue. When it related to police officers being allowed to use medical marijuana, we took care of that issue. I don't know what else we could have done to not give everybody their due. In other words, deliberate. I am surprised that this Senate has taken up in special order since I've been here. We started out with certificate of need. We went to 2 different school vouchers. Then we went to the 6-week ban where we say we have compassion and care about the unborn. Well, this was a compassion and care act that cares about children that are alive, that are here. If you really have compassion, we should be taking up this bill. You can vote against it. We should take up this bill. We shouldn't be dealing with Chinese land blocking. We should be dealing with issues that really have deserved their place to be placed in a special order slot. We should respect the work that our fellow senator has given to this bill. This body is supposed to be a deliberative body. We need to start deliberating with compassion.
Thank you, Senator from Colleton. Senator from Clarendon, what purpose do you rise, sir? You've been very patient.
Well, first of all, I would like to ask unanimous consent to have the words of the senator from Colleton in the journal, but I do want to speak for briefly on a matter of personal interest also.
I'll take up one at a time. The unanimous consent that our comments be placed in the journal. Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Senator from Clarendon is recognized on point of personal interest.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I'm going to flip the script a little bit. I don't want to necessarily talk about medical marijuana, but I will say this about medical marijuana. I listened to the senator from Beaufort, and if anybody did in fact say that the bill has not been vetted, I know myself has been vetted because, as the senator from Colleton said, there was a time when I was on the subcommittee, and I think even to this day, I think I spent more time on that bill than I did any other bill since I was here, albeit on the other side of the issue. And I think the senator from Beaufort hopefully would agree that we have not agreed on this bill, but I think it's been respectful, our disagreement, and I've always commended him for the fact that the bill that we are debating is much, much, much better than the bill when we first began years ago when I sat on the subcommittee, but I didn't want to talk about that. I felt like since we were talking about bills that deal with health care, I want to just remind the body that for the last several years, I have filed a bill to expand Medicaid. And Senator, I know you're frustrated because your bill hadn't passed, but your bill has been getting some hearings and some committees, and it's being voted on in both bodies, and my bill to expand Medicaid has never gotten even a committee meeting, a committee hearing. And we're talking about whether we want to agree or not agree that medical marijuana saves lives and it has medicinal value. I'm not quite there yet, but I do know this. If Medicaid expansion is passed and we have 200,000 to 300,000 South Carolinians who fall between that gap, qualifies, and they're all of a sudden able to get affordable quality health care, that will save lives in South Carolina. And as I said, for some reason, can't even get a committee hearing, but I'll just end with this. If we really want to provide compassionate care in South Carolina, there should be no debate that Medicaid expansion will provide that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Clarendon. Senator from Richland, Senator McLeod, what purpose do you rise?
Unanimous consent.
State your request.
To have the words of the senator from Clarendon entered in the journal, and also to for a point of personal interest.
Is there objection? Unanimous consent. Hearing none, so ordered. Senator from Georgetown, why she comes to the podium. You're recognized for introduction. while the senator from Richland comes to the podium. Senator from Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator from Richland, for giving me a quick introduction. I'd like to introduce my friend, an old Army buddy of mine. We call him the tip of the spear from his experience in the military, Jeremy Thompson. Jeremy's now a federal prosecutor in Miami doing good work for us down there. He's here at the State House today for training situation. Please welcome him, Jeremy Thompson.
Welcome to the Senate. We're delighted to have you visiting with us today. Thank you, Senator from Georgetown, and thank you, Senator from Richland. Is recognized Senator McLeod. Upon a personal interest, up to 5 minutes. Senator McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't think I'd be up here today either, but just wanted to take a quick minute to say thank you to the senator from Beaufort. This has been his fight for longer than I've served in this chamber, and it's been my fight for as long as I've served in this chamber, but it was also my fight when I served in the South Carolina House. And to see the amount of time and energy and effort and resources that have been expended just to try and pass a bill that would help so many people across South Carolina, a bill that would help me. As I look around, I see every day that I'm still the only one in this chamber who lives with a chronic health condition and wears my mask faithfully, even when it's hot, even when I'm tired, even when I don't feel like it. And coming over when I was elected in 2016 to this body, I often talked about having to relearn so many of the things that I had to, to unlearn so many of the things that I had to learn when I was in the House for 6 years. But what I appreciated most about serving in this body seemed to be, when I got here, not just the consideration for each other. It was the deliberation that the senator from Colleton mentioned. It was the fact that I got to leave the chaos of the House. Some of it I missed. A lot of it I didn't. But when I got here, everybody seemed intentional about the work that we're supposed to do. They seemed to be considerate and respectful of each other's opinions and perspectives and politics. And so to now witness what I did when this bill was brought up for special order, knowing that I have voted against many bills that have been set for special order over my objection, even after putting my name on a bill or bills in opposition to those bills, I still sat, I still stood respectfully and did the work and asked the questions and voted against it if I was opposed to it. But to have an issue like this that not only impacts me personally, but a lot of us in here who suffer with chronic health conditions, or to have family members and constituents who suffer with chronic health conditions. In fact, I believe next week I'll be meeting with a family that I met with a few weeks ago, right in the room next door. A mom who cried and talked about losing her son to an opioid overdose. Those are the discussions, those are the voices that need to be represented in this debate. It can't just be about politics. It can't just be about whether we would use marijuana or whether we would have a family member who needs medical marijuana. It has to be bigger than that. Aren't we bigger than that? To see and to hear the passion and the frustration and the anger in the senator from Beaufort's voice earlier. It took me back. It took me back to when I stood here. And I have co-sponsored that bill and worked with him every year, every time he's introduced it. Did the same thing in the House. Served on 3M in the House, tried to get it through. Served on medical affairs here in the Senate, and worked with all of you to try and just think outside of yourselves. Think about those who suffer with cancer. Think about those who suffer from PTSD, epilepsy, lupus, sickle cell, all of the chronic health conditions that we either have or we know somebody who suffers daily. And if because this is an option, why would we stand in the way of getting people the help and the support that they need? I'm not going to, I know I'm probably at my 5 minutes.
You're at that point. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just want you to think about that and to think about doing things differently for the right reasons for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Richland. Senator from Fairfield, what purpose do you rise?
Unanimous consent request.
State your request.
Words from Senator Richland be put in the journal.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Fairfield.
Point of personal interest.
Recognized for point of personal interest. Senator from Fairfield is recognized.
There was a train. The train was loaded down, Senator from Williamsburg, with all kinds of things that they were taking to the next town. And this train was a fairly new train, but has been trying for years to start its work as a courier of goods and services across the mountain to the next town that had been isolated for years. Train is loaded down with stuff. It starts moving up the hill. And eventually, about halfway up the hill, the train gave out, and it was stuck halfway up the hill. You may remember this story. And it stuck. It couldn't go back down. I mean, it was released. You go back down to the town. Couldn't make it over the hill. And so it was stuck there on the tracks. And the folks in the next town couldn't get their goods and services that they'd been waiting on forever and ever and ever and ever, real needs that they had. The answers to their needs were sitting on this train that was stuck on the tracks. And they couldn't go down because they couldn't do anything about it. They didn't have the strength to go up the tracks. So finally, Senator from Colleton, another train came by. This was a big locomotive. And it came up there, booking, all the way up to the train. And they waved them down and say, "Stop, save us, save us." And so the train stopped and said, "What do you need?" And they said, "Well, we need help getting over this hill. Will you help us get over the hill?" And they said, "I'm too busy. I can't do that. I got other things I got to do." So went on by. Train tried again, couldn't do it again. Another train came by. This one was a passenger train and said, "No, we've got other priorities. We can't really help you." They asked for help. Then finally, you'll remember this, a little blue engine came pumping up the tracks. Little blue engine, shiny new, little teeny little train comes up next to him, and the people waving him down saying, look, we're loaded up with things we know children need. We're loaded up with things that we know that the doctors have told us will help our kids in the community in the next town and help them with what they need. But we're stuck here on the tracks, and nobody will help us. And we've done the work to get over the hill, but nobody's going to help us. But the little blue engine said, I'll try. I've never been up the train myself at all before, but at least I'll try. And so that little engine started, it connected with the train and started going, started inching up over the hill. And the little blue engine started pulling it. And as he did, you know what the little engine was saying, do you not? I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. And everybody on the train behind him saying, I think I can. I think I can. Because this has been going on forever and ever and ever. No one thought it could ever be done. But there was one little blue engine that says, you know what? I think I can do it. And he worked his way up the hill, pulling the train in behind the hill. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. He crested over the top. And all of a sudden, the people on the other town said, yay, we're finally going to get the help that our doctors have said we needed. We're finally going to get the medicine that we've been needing for years. And as soon as he crested, the little blue engine went down the hill and said, I knew I could, I knew I could, I knew I could, I knew I could. I share that story with you to share that there have been children and elderly waiting on an answer to their medical conditions. Kids with epilepsy, old folks that are suffering from all kinds of debilitating diseases that other states with their trains have been able to get the help to the citizens they've needed. But not in South Carolina. We let it stuck. And then all of a sudden, hauling from Beaufort, South Carolina, a senator, Tom Davis, was the little blue engine that could. And he went up next and took that thing that was stuck there forever. And for 8 years, started hauling this over the top. And when I say hauling this over the top, when you have a problem with the bill, Senator from Williamsburg, he said, what can we change the bill to get you on what? On board. So if you don't think my analogy is working, you don't like the bill, Senator from Richmond, what can we do to get you on board? And he was willing to make changes to this bill that I'm guessing, Senator from Beaufort, that you really didn't want to make. But you were willing to make the changes to get everyone on board the train. And finally, in this story, we get over the hill. The little engine that could, the senator from Beaufort was able to get everyone on board, and we passed this bill 28-16. Took it down the mountain, and we got down the mountain, the House said, go back. And now the Senate is going to make us spend another 8 years with a little engine that could, pulling it up. Senator from Beaufort, we thank you for the work that you've done for 8 years on this bill. From the bottom of my heart. But more importantly, we don't just owe the senator from Beaufort the right to take up his bill that we told him he was going to have, told us all he would have. We owe the citizens we represent to take up this bill. The vote was not 23-22. The vote was 28-16.
Senator from Collington.
Unanimous consent request for 5 minutes for the senator.
5 additional. Is there objection?
The vote was not 23.
Hearing no objection. You're granted another 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes. Senator from Fairfield.
The vote was not 23-22. The vote was 28-16, which proves that the little engine from Beaufort County took the bill over the hill. We recognized that, and we said, if the House screwed you on the other side of the hill, we're going to give you a shot to do it again. 28-16. This bill is not what started last year. This bill, I'm correct, Senator from Beaufort, is where we finished last year. So every one of you that didn't want to get on board, but the Senator from Beaufort changed his bill to get you on board, that's the same bill we're having now. It's the same bill we sent over to the Senate. I don't know what y'all are doing. I ain't asking you to pass the bill at all. I respect your stance on the bill. I'm asking you to debate the freaking bill. Do the citizens of South Carolina not at least deserve the right to have us debate a bill that meets their needs, a bill that's already crossed over the hill? Why would we not debate a bill that's exactly like the one we passed last year by an overwhelming 28-16 margin? And if anyone objects, couldn't we at least debate it and then allow you to object again in the end? Don't our citizens deserve that? Picture the citizens in the next town that have been waiting 8 years. Children for their medicine, old folks for their medicine. We have a senator that now has made this so conservative of a bill that there right now is one way to get marijuana. If this passes, there'd be two. One way is to drive to 5 Points, roll down your window, and get marijuana. The other is call your doctor, make an appointment, go see the doctor, have the doctor documented that he tried everything else. The only thing left after he tried anything else was to get medical cannabis. He still can't give it to you. You have to wait and go someplace to get it and use it. Now, which way do you think people are going to abuse it? Rolling down the window in 5 points or following this? He listened to you, the little engine that could, to try to get everybody on board to get over the hill. Listen to each and every one of us. And we passed this 2816. And I'm not saying, personally, I feel like I owe you, Senator from Beaufort, but I think more importantly, we owe the citizens we represent to at least have a debate on the bill. Is preemption any more or less important than this? Banning aliens from owning property, is it any more or less important than this? If passing 1 but not 2 voucher bills any more important than this, when the body has already spoken on this? When we make decisions, we are defining our relationship with the House. And so I hope we think about the decisions we've made this year of us getting our bill over the hill to them. When we sent it over here them last year, they flipped their finger at us and sent us back on the other side of the mountain. Whether we act or don't act is sending a message. So if we don't send it back to them, we are saying you are more powerful than we are. Is that the message that we want to send? So if we're not tackling this 8-year issue, what's our plan? So if we're not going to do this, let's say we persuade the little engine that could, Senator Beaufort, to keep his name sponsoring the bill. What's the plan? What do we tell him? Try again next year? Try again next year? If this is not the plan we're going to do to keep that engine from going over the hill, what is it that we're going to do? We've got 2 ways to tackle this. We've already missed the boat on one. I hope we don't miss the other. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator from Fairfield. Senator from Collington, what purpose do you raise?
Unanimous consent request.
State your request.
That the words from the senator from Fairfield, along with the effects, the choo-choo effects, be placed in the journal.
Without objection. Are there any petitions, memorials, presentments of grand jury? Senator from Kershaw, what purpose?
Unanimous consent, please.
State your unanimous consent request.
To voice a statement of personal interest.
You're recognized for up to 5 minutes. Senator from Charleston, Senator Campson, while she comes to the podium, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Not for an expression of personal interest, but for a local bill, if we can ever get to the calendar.
Senate is so informed. Senator from Kershaw is recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I won't need 5. I feel like I need to say something about this bill we've been discussing so much today, the Compassionate Care Act. And I just have to say, this is something I've supported since I met Senator Davis. I think we met, the senator from Beaufort and I met in 2015 or 16, and I was just at a little women's group, and he was the guest speaker. And he talked about this, and this was his passion. And before that night, I was a no. I didn't really support it. And he came, and I didn't know him at all, and I appreciated his time and his work back then. Since then, I've become an advocate for this and support it, and it is my great regret, it's a regret that I was not here last Thursday to offer my yes vote, which would have pushed this to the floor. Y'all have no idea how bad I feel about that. But I was doing a constituency event, and I rarely miss session, but I did that day. Didn't know this vote was coming. So with that being said, I feel like we're at a funeral, and we're not. The work goes on. The will of the people will be heard. This doesn't end today. Senator from Beaufort has started and established all the groundwork, all the foundation, the work of the subcommittees, the support by community efforts, agencies, all that. It's a group effort that he has led. It will continue. I feel confident that our state will recognize this medicinal marijuana for what it is and accept it and allow people who need it to be able to access it. So I don't know if I reached 5 minutes. I try to stay under 5 minutes, but thank you for your time. I know we got a lot of talking today. I'm going to sit down and listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kershaw.